Episode 4 of the MoneySmart podcast. We're joined here by Pete. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Nice to meet you. My name's Peter Blackhall. I'm a chartered financial planner based in Solihull. And yeah, great to come on the podcast.
I think we should go straight into it, to be honest. I think the first question I have is, why did you actually choose to go into your actual career path of becoming like a chartered financial planner?
So that's a really interesting question because I've got a bit of a non-standard route into it, I suppose. So with me, I went to university, graduated in 2016, but I did something completely different at uni to finance. And then I ended up changing careers around about 5 years ago into finance. And what happened was I was working in marketing. My degree was in public relations, so I was working in marketing and PR. And I was just quite unhappy with what I was doing. I didn't find it very interesting. To give you an example, I was writing press releases about metal rods in really boring, heavy engineering stuff. And I just thought, God, this is just a bit dire, to be honest. So around about the same time, this is probably about 5 years ago now, I met my dad's financial advisor because he was doing something with his pensions. And this guy shows up to our house and he's driving the nice car and he's in a nice suit. And he's talking to my dad about investments and gold and the stock market. And I just thought, wow, this sounds really interesting, because I always had a bit of an interest in investing anyway, through watching like personal finance stuff on YouTube. And I just thought, actually, this sounds really interesting. And so what I did is I set up a call with him, my dad's financial advisor. And I said, look, can I just pick your brain for an hour to see if this is something that I could do? Because I Googled it and it's not obvious how you get into being a financial planner. It's an industry that's a little bit sort of cloaked. What happened is I ended up having a call with him. We had a chat for about an hour and he ended up offering me a job, not in that same call, but in the sort of weeks and months that followed. And I went to go and work with him, and he owns a financial advice firm based in Solihull. And I kind of just went in as a bit of an all-round helper person, I suppose, sort of learn the ropes from the bottom. And then, as soon as I was there, I thought, right, this is the career for me. How do I actually get into the advice role? And so that's when I went on and did all my qualifications. That's kind of the story of how I got into it, I suppose.
Talk about picking like his brain. What was like the main thing that you took away from that actually made you think, yeah, I want to go into this field of like finance?
I suppose the main thing is what I was doing before in marketing. I sort of felt like it didn't really matter what I was doing. I wasn't really impacting anyone particularly. Whereas in the financial advice role, what's really cool about it is you're actually having a substantial impact on people's lives because you're investing their money. You're helping them perhaps to retire early, do things that they didn't think that they could. And I just find it's much more impactful. That sort of struck me when I had that first conversation with him, I suppose.
What's your ultimate aim? So where do you see yourself in sort of 20, 30 years? Do you want to stay in the financial advice sort of industry?
20 to 30 years. Well, I mean, who knows? Because, what could happen, right? Exactly, aliens could have invaded by that point. We could have been hit by an asteroid. I think I'm really enjoying what I'm doing. It took me a while to sort of find my feet career-wise. I'm nearly 30 now. And it took until 5 years ago to really land on what I wanted to do. I'm pretty happy doing it, and I think I'll continue to do it, hopefully, for the foreseeable.
You speak about having like a positive impact on people as well. I think at the moment it's quite prominent for you because of like the cost of living crisis as well and everything. How do you feel you're actually aiding people in your role?
In terms of the cost of living crisis? Yeah. So Cost of living crisis is an interesting one because it's mainly, what's happening is it's mainly an inflation problem that's making the cost of living, it's a bit of a squeeze for everyone. And so what I mainly do with clients, it kind of goes into two areas really. It's the investment portfolio side, so investing their money in a way that's right for them. But then it's also the financial planning side. So on the financial planning side, that is very much about making sure that 10, 20, 30 years from now, they're not going to run out of money. Because although, if you think about it, the cost of living crisis today, okay, this is just like, this year and last year, but in the grand scope of decades, this will pass and then there'll be the next crisis that comes along.
Just making sure they're prepared for future crises and just for the rest of their life, really. It's not necessarily just about the here and now, but about planning for the future and being prepared for the future as well.
Yeah, you've got to have a long-term view with it, because if you think about it, a lot of my clients are in their sort of early to mid-50s, and let's say they stop working at 60, well, that's not the end point, because they might live until they're 100.
Mm-hmm. So they've got 40 years worth of money to live. They need to live off.
Yeah, they've got to have a pot of money that can sustain them for 40 years. Yeah. So a lot of what I try and do with clients is try to educate them in the sense that although it seems bleak now, this will pass. 2 years ago we had coronavirus. 2 or 3 years before that we had Brexit. Trump was around about the same time. A few years before that we had a euro crisis. 5 years or so before that, we had the financial. So the world just lurches from crisis to crisis. But if you look at the data, ultimately stock markets just ride on, because ultimately what it is people all around the world get up every day, they go to work, they become more productive, they start businesses. The world just keeps going regardless of what crisis we're in any particular moment.
So are you basically there to essentially cover for their future and minimize the risk of what they're potentially doing and advising them on that?
Yeah, so what I mainly do comes under those two areas. It's the investment portfolio side. So that's making sure that their money, which is most of it's in pensions and ISAs, it's making sure that the portfolio is invested in a way that's going to sustain them until they die. Because what we don't want to do is have people running out of money in their 80s when they can't go and work again. So yeah, a lot of what I do is on the portfolio side, making sure it's a good portfolio, it's efficient, it's performing well. But then in terms of the financial planning side, a lot of that is about showing them what does your future look like in 10, 20 years. What adjustments can we make to the portfolio now? And let's model that, and I'll show you in a visual way what the impact of that would be. And it's kind of trying to get clients to see the bigger picture, if you like.
Do you think investment and strategies similar to that are the key to sustainable wealth, or what do you think of things like budgeting as well and sort of saving your money? How do you feel about that?
Budgeting is it's just a fact of life, isn't it? Mm. When I hear the word budgeting, what I really think about is, if we just take a step back and think, well, what is a budget? A budget really is everyone's got limited resources. Even if you're a high earner, it's possible to outspend your income. We've all, for example, heard the stories of lottery winners that go broke and rappers who have millions of dollars a year income, but they still blow it all. Yeah. So a budget really is just about managing your resource, ideally so that you can have a surplus, because what you really want is your expenditure to be less than your income, and then you take the surplus, the headroom, if you like, and then you invest it. Yeah. And that's how you become wealthy over the years and decades to come.
In terms of your own finances, how do you manage your own finances? I presume you invest, but do you budget? You don't?
No, I did.
I was going to say, yeah. So what's your sort of strategy with your own finances?
Similar to what you do with your clients, or?
Yeah, in terms of the investment side, in terms of the philosophy and the types of funds and so on, yeah, it's the same stuff pretty much that my clients use, because that's why I'm recommending it.
Yeah.
Well, it's not the only reason why I'm recommending it, but I've got to be, doing the same sort of stuff. In terms of budgeting, I'm not really someone who, I can't sit around on a Sunday with a spreadsheet and start looking at, saving a couple of quid here or there. I'm much more of a big picture person. I think as long as I stick to the three sort of main principles, which to my mind are have an emergency fund in place, so 3 to 6 months of expenses, and then if anything goes wrong in your life, like you lose your job, or your boiler breaks, your car, dies on the side of the Small Heath Highway or wherever, then you're okay. You're not absolutely screwed. You've got that buffer. So the first step, have an emergency fund in place. The second step is, it sounds really obvious, but you've got to spend less than you earn consistently, regardless of what's going on in the world, regardless of whether, Putin does whatever in Ukraine, or the stock market goes down a bit, or Kim Jong-un decides he's in a mood that day. It doesn't matter. You've got to stick to the principle of spending less than your income, and then anything over that, invest it in a decent portfolio, and that's how you become wealthy over time.
You talk about...
You speak about spending less than you earn, and like all these rappers like blowing their money and everything. What do you think about people who like drinking like alcohol and stuff when you go out partying? Do you believe in like everything in moderation, or how do you see that stuff?
So a bit of an interesting one for me is I actually don't drink alcohol anymore. I used to. I just find that for me, I just don't get along with it that well. So nights out are actually extraordinarily cheap for me, because I can go out to wherever, Albert Schloss in Birmingham is one I like, and a soda and lime, or a diet. I'm quite a cheap night out, if you like. But I'm not saying that people should not have a life. I'm not saying you should save every penny and invest it, because life is all about experiences at the end of the day. But I am saying that if you don't make a conscious effort to spend less than you earn and invest, then in decades to come, when you want to stop work, you're not going to have any money, basically. All you'll have is the state pension at 66, which is about 10 grand a year per person. So let's say you've got a husband and wife and they both have full state pension entitlement, then yeah, they'll have 20 grand a year income coming in from age 66. Which is quite nice because it's guaranteed and it will be inflation linked and so on. But in reality, most people probably, you don't work your entire life to, just scrape by in retirement. Most people want to have quite a nice retirement. Yeah. And so the difference between the state pension, if you get a full one, and you'll need to do a forecast on that at the time and make sure you pay in the correct national insurance and all that stuff. But the difference is what you'll need to have in an invested pot to draw down from, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. You touched on it there, always, about sort of going out partying, alcohol, things like that. For young people especially, what do you think are some like unnecessary outgoings which you could cut or reduce to try and sort of maximise your savings?
Well, I think that's an unfair question, because you're putting me in a corner slightly, in the sense that I don't want to be the guy who's saying, look, stop going out to Starbucks, stop having the avocados on toast, just stay at home, beans and rice, all that kind of stuff. Because I get it, the cost of living is really high. What would be my advice to... Sorry, what was the question again?
Sort of unnecessary outgoings that you could maybe reduce or substitute. Do you have any sort of like for yourself at university maybe? Because we all know when you're at uni, money can be difficult. What did you do to sort of mitigate against the cost of living and sort of to cut your expenditure?
So when I went to university, which wasn't that long ago, I went from 2012 to 2016. And the year that I went, interestingly, 2012, we were the first year where the fees went up massively. So it was about 9 grand a year, I think. And before then it was like 3 grand a year or something. So that was a bit of a kick. But at uni, I worked part-time, and I found that helped a lot. And I also used the work that I did to aid me in getting a placement. So when I was at university, I studied PR, and it was a 4-year degree, and you had to do a placement year as part of that. But they weren't easy to get, the placements. And so when I was in second year, I thought, well, my CV's pretty blank, if I'm honest with you. Other than, I did used to wash cars in like the Touchwood car park in Solihull. That was like my first ever job. So I thought, well, what can I do to earn a bit of money and also get some experience at the same time? And so what I did is I actually phoned up the Bournemouth University, because that's where I went to university. I phoned up the press and PR team, and I was like, can I just come in and kind of shadow someone for a week just to get a bit of experience? Because my CV is like, I'm not going to get a placement here. And they were like, yeah, come and spend some time with us and see what we're all about. And I spent about 2 days getting coffee and not really doing a lot. And then they offered me a job off the back of that. So I worked a day a week at the same time as doing my course. And actually, it was quite decent money compared with working in like a pub or something. So that really helped. Working at uni really helps. A lot of people will say you can't juggle working and a degree. I think that's completely false, because you can. And if anything, I think it helps because it gives you that little bit of routine that when you're a student, it's just so easy to fall into this kind of weird nocturnal lifestyle.
Yeah. Okay. So that's good advice for sort of generally going to university.
Yeah.
When you come out of uni, sort of, can be quite overwhelming. Do you not think when you sort of, because it all happens so quickly going into the real world, how would you deal with money coming straight out of uni? Like, do you have any advice for sort of straight post-university?
Like fresh graduates, you've just left, you've got that first graduate out of uni.
Yeah.
It really depends on the individual, because everyone's situation is completely unique. I would say if you can, I would personally try to avoid renting. Mm-hmm. So if you can live at home, then you want to milk that for as long as possible and just try and buy a house.
Yeah.
Because people I know, today, so, they maybe graduated 7-8 years ago, and they're still not on the housing ladder, and the rent's gone up every year with inflation, and it's tough.
Yeah, of course.
What do you think? What are your...
Well, my older sister, she came home for 2 years after uni, and basically she just saved prolifically. Like, it was during COVID, and so it made it easier because she wouldn't have been going out anyway, but she didn't go out for like a year, and she saved as much as she possibly could, and then she eventually bought a house. And I think that's ideal, sort of, if you can do that, because you've got a foot on the housing ladder and whatnot. But I know it's not that easy for everyone, because sometimes you won't be able to go home, or some people just can't say, well, their job isn't good enough to allow them to do that. So I just say it definitely varies from person to person. Yeah,
it sounds like, she was in a fortunate situation that she could do that. And I'm not saying that everyone can do it, because, for example, there's a lot of people who just live in areas that there's just, very limited employment opportunities. So they might have to just move to, a lot of people move to London, for example. But if you can, it just helps a lot, because I find that as soon as you're in that sort of trap of paying rent, it's very difficult to get out of it. That would be my view.
I think, but the issue at the moment is with like the rising interest rates and stuff. Say if you like invest in properties and stuff, and you're trying to like rent them out and stuff, it's not as in, if you look at it in an investment way, it's not that rewarding anymore because of the like higher mortgage payments they're having to pay. What do you think about that?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So in recent years, the government has become very anti-landlord for lots of reasons. Higher interest rates makes it effectively a lot less profitable, if at all profitable. But that's from an investment standpoint. In terms of a main residence, so where you live, you've really got two options. You either own a home, and typically you'll have a mortgage and pay it off over decades, or you're a renter. And the issue with being a renter it's not so bad in the short term. Let's say you're moving to a new city or something, you need to just get a handle on where you want to live and stuff. It's when people do it for decades, it becomes a real issue. Because, again, if I take it back to what I was saying before in terms of that long-term, position for a client, let's say they retire at 60, if they don't have a paid-off house, like if they still have to rent every month, then they're going to need a massive portfolio to be able to afford to do that. Yeah. Because rent's extortionate these days.
Is it because of the large outgoing that it has every month? So if you're looking into the future, say they're relying on their pension now, and they're having to say like £500 a month they're having to give away. Is that like quite a big factor when it comes to looking in the long run?
Yeah, it's because you're not paying off. You're not owning an asset at the end of it. So the benefit of renting is it gives you flexibility, and you can move to a different city quite easily. But the problem with it is you don't own anything at the end. Most people I know, just anecdotally, I don't know the exact statistics on this nationally, but everyone I know who owns a property is far wealthier than the people who don't. And a lot of it is just because they own the property. The property has gone up in value a lot in the last 5 or 10 years. And so their debt in relation to the value of that property has gone, is less. What would your thoughts be on the whole sort of renting versus owning?
Owning a property gives you more security, I guess. But if I'm like in a new role, and I've just been offered it in like London or something, I'd have to rent. But that would be short term. I'd see it as, and then I'd save up, and then long term, I'd like to buy a property.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, as you say, renting is okay in the short term, but over decades, it just creates a bit of an issue down the line, because you'll always need somewhere to live. So what happens if rent, when you're 60, is massively more than it is today? Which it probably will be.
Yeah. On a bit of a different note, a lot of what you do is investing related, as you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Do you think so? First, what's the sort of your clients? How old are they generally? What would their average age be? Would you say is it a mix, or is it all very one sort of demographic?
It's a bit of a mix, but it tends to be. The average age of someone who seeks financial advice is probably in their 50s. So my clients, the majority of them are in their 50s and 60s. They're sort of in that lead up to retirement, and they want to sort things out. They've probably been putting it off for years. But I've got a few younger ones as well. But when I say younger, I mean younger in terms of the typical demographic for an IFA client. So I've got a couple of clients in their early 40s. I think that's the youngest probably. I did have a meeting once with someone who was 35, but that was quite an unusual situation. He was just an extraordinarily high earner. So most typically the clients that seek financial advice are older because they've just had more time to build up some wealth in pensions and things like that.
Fair enough. What we do, it's sort of aimed more towards younger children, not necessarily younger children, but younger people.
Yeah.
Sort of our age, 16 sort of plus, and then going into uni. Do you think there is an age where it's too young to start investing and sort of getting into these habits?
I don't think there's an age where you can. I don't think you can be too young to get into good habits. But I think, you've got to be sort of realistic with it as well. You're not going to be investing probably when you're 12 or 13 because you probably just haven't.
You don't know what it even is.
Yeah, you won't know what it is yet, and you don't have income yet. I think it really starts to become much more relevant when you become independent. So you have income, you're out in the world for the first time. I would, again, just bring it back to the 3 principles. Have an emergency fund.
Yeah.
You want to be spending less than you make and then investing the surplus. But in reality, it might take someone a few years just to hit that first one, having the emergency fund.
Yeah.
Especially with the cost of living as it is now, a lot of people probably don't save anything.
Yeah. Because they need it to survive. It's hard for people to put away money when they need it to buy food or whatever.
Exactly, and I do recognise that. I'm not trying to sound completely out of touch,
Yeah.
but it's just the reality that that's what you have to do in order to, grow wealthy over time, and that's why we have pensions. So the government, when you're in a job, you get auto enrolled into a pension, and it kind of forces people to save money without them really realising.
Yeah.
I think on the other side of the pension, on the opposite side of the spectrum, you speak about 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds.
Yeah.
For like parents, what do you think about having like junior ISAs set up to like, as in, say with a university and have the debt of that to help them like pay that off, for example?
Yeah, I mean, a junior ISA can be a good idea. I've got a couple of clients with junior ISAs, and yeah, it's for that exact reason. They might have children who are 5, 6, 7, something like that. And they say, okay, let's start investing something so that when they get to uni, or maybe it can be like a first house deposit, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, I mean, a junior ISA, it's just a wrapper. It's just a tax advantaged account that you can stick money in. And then once the money's in there, it grows tax free. But the important thing is how it's invested once it's in there. Because you can have ISAs or junior ISAs that are cash ones, but in reality, it'd be far better to actually invest it in an equity-led portfolio, and then you'll get some growth on it.
You mentioned, as in the investment part of it, and you mentioned your actual clients being of like around 40, 50s. Would you advise people a bit younger to come to you as well, if they've just had a kid who's like 6 years old or something, and they're trying to actually build, say, like a fund for him in the future, and like come to you to help them like invest it, for example?
Yeah, I mean, there's not a limit in terms of, it's not like we will only see people of a certain age. It's just that naturally, there are certain points in life generally when people tend to think about financial advice, and it tends to be, when you're 50, you get that scary letter through the post. It's like, these are your pension options. People are thinking, God, I better actually sort this out. But yeah, I mean, you can be any age. I could take on a client who's in their early 20s. It wouldn't be an issue. But it's just that, because of various reasons, mainly regulatory reasons, the cost of advice might be a bit steep. If someone hasn't got that much money to invest, it becomes a lot more palatable when it's a bigger pot, if that makes sense.
I think this ties in quite well to our saving koala. So, as you can see there, it's just like it's a koala with like tokens in it, and basically every time it's for the younger demographic, say 7 to 14, and every time the child does like a good thing or something, or like a chore, for example, you just put a token in, and then when it gets to the top, they get a reward. And we're thinking about teaching the behaviors. So when they get older, they know everything they do gets like a value. Say their work, they'll get money for it. Then they can maybe invest it to grow it. What would you think of it? Do you think there's any ways you can improve it?
I think as a concept, I mean, I really like it. I think, look, I don't have kids, so I'm not really expert in kids' toys. And I'm not sure if there is really an age where it's too early. But I think in terms of the behavioural side, it's kind of like you're kind of teaching them delayed gratification.
Yeah, that's it, yeah.
And so I don't think there's any age that's too early for that, really.
It's basically like the concept and idea that it's representative of the real world, in that you do a task and you're not always going to be instantly rewarded from it. On top of that, we also want to instill the idea that you do a task, you do get a reward for it at some point, and it's just like the real world and the working world where things don't come for free. Right. And I think to instill that concept early on is quite important, so it's not a shock when you go out into the wider world.
We don't want to bring the actual word of money into it, because if you say that to a child, they're not really going to understand it at that moment. So it's just about the behaviour specifically instead of the actual money idea.
They're learning about money without realising it is basically the idea.
What's the age sort of target for it?
What would you think first?
Oh, I mean, again, I'm not an expert on kids' toys. I mean, if I had to guess, it seems, I mean, I've got a niece who's 3, and this is the sort of thing she would actually probably have a good go with. But I think she's quite advanced for her age. So if I had to guess, maybe, early prime, sort of 5, 6, 7, that kind of age.
It's around that, and then
5
we
till
14, I think.
14?
Yeah.
Right. Fair enough.
I mean, would you, so because you guys are 16 now, right?
Yeah.
So would you, if someone gave this to you when you were like 10 or something, do you think you'd have enjoyed it?
I think definitely.
It would have done
enjoyed
me a
it a different way. It
favour.
would have been useful to me, definitely.
Right.
And I think it's far more interactive and enjoyable than just a normal money box. Because,
Right.
and especially for the younger kids, it's like, it's an animal, it's a koala, they're sort of attracted to animals and colour and vibrancy and things like that.
Oh, definitely.
So it's a more enjoyable way of sort of learning these skills.
I guess
Yeah.
it brings a bit of education into like different animals as well, I guess. With like the koala, because that's like an Australian animal, we don't really know about it, and there is quite a bit of knowledge behind it. Like, for example, that's an endangered animal and stuff, and that can tie into it without learning about it.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Well, I didn't know that, so you've just taught me that today.
That's
So we're both getting something out of the podcast.
But yeah, so we sort of, this product and the whole business really it's about for younger kids, sort of teaching these behaviours, these skills, and sort of instilling the idea in them that things don't come for free.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's sort of, we're trying to have a positive impact.
I think tying into that now, as we look at the younger self, what would you, if you had to look back now, what would you say to your younger self if you could?
In terms of, because that's a very, I mean, I could go off on so many tangents there. In terms of money or career or...
Career and money.
In terms of career, what would I say to my younger self? I mean, I'd probably say a lot, to be honest. I would say, first of all, don't be afraid of changing directions, because what you think you might be doing... So like when you're 15, 16, 17, you might have an idea of where your life's going to end up, but you might get to 21, 22, and a different opportunity might come along, and it might be something completely different that you never even thought of, and that might be better suited to you. So my advice to my younger self would be, don't be afraid of changing direction, but always have something that you're aiming towards. So, for example, one of the mistakes I see sometimes in young people is when they seem a little bit adrift because they haven't quite decided yet what they want to do. And it's like, you're better off just nailing down something and then starting on the journey towards it. And then even if you change direction, then you're still so much further ahead than had you not decided.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
What would you say to yourself on the money side then?
On the money side,
Was there anything sort of financially that you would do different if you...
oh yeah,
time again?
I do. Yeah, I do a lot differently. I mean, I think, there's always the benefit of hindsight, isn't there? So it's a tricky question. I mean, the one thing I would say is you need to be long term in your view. So I used to be very short term. I'd watch all the sort of, get rich quick things, trading. And in reality, nothing good ever comes quickly. Like the guy who's the doctor or the dentist, or they've got their own business, or they've built up a decent portfolio, it's probably taken them years to do that.
Definitely.
But you're only seeing the tip of the iceberg. So, I would tell myself that if I could.
I think talking about, as in this mindset and stuff, is there like a quote that you actually live by?
A quote that I live
It's a bit on
by.
the
We ask
spot.
everyone sort of like a quote that maybe that they can not necessarily live by, but something that sort of inspires them, that they think represents their mindset well.
A quote, man. I mean, you really put me on the spot here.
If you don't have one.
No, I could probably. So I do have one. It's a little bit controversial though, and it's. Let me get this right. It's it's those who don't take risks will never drink champagne.
That's kind of nice.
Can you explain what it actually means by that?
So if you never take any risks, As in, you never, let's say you never move jobs, or you never start a business, or you never put yourself out of your comfort zone in any way. And on the investing side, if you don't take investment risk, as in put your money in stuff that has, it will be probably quite volatile short term, but long term, unless you do those things, then you won't have the benefits later. Does that make sense?
Definitely, yeah.
The final thing that we like to ask, is there any one particular role model that you follow, or do you have anybody like that?
Anyone that sort of has inspired you? So you spoke about your dad's financial advisor,
Right.
but have you got anybody that sort of has motivated you to go down the path you have?
So what I do is I have different role models for different areas of my life. Because, for example, you might have a role model in terms of career or business, but then you might have a different one for relationships, and then something different for like fitness, for example. So I couldn't really nail it down to one, I don't think. I mean, in terms of business, probably Warren Buffett, someone like that. One of the most successful investors of all time. In terms of fitness and health, I watch a lot of YouTube influencers. Mike Thurston, I really like him. Shout out to Mike Thurston. Who would I pick for? So I have different ones for different things.
Fair enough.
But what about you guys? Do you have any?
Well, mine's a bit different. It's just to do with sports. So my role model is Moeen Ali. He's a cricketer, and I just admire how he goes about his sport and everything. But his actual private life is just keep hidden. You don't see him doing a lot of press conferences and everything, and not being out there. It's he's got his public stuff, and then there's a different side where just everything's closed off.
Right.
Mine's still sporting. Just Cristiano Ronaldo, the dedication he has to sort of all aspects of his life.
All right.
And the success as well. I think it's definitely something to look up to. Not necessarily just with football, but in all aspects of your life. You can dedicate yourself that much.
Yeah.
Then you definitely deserve respect.
Yeah, Cristiano Ronaldo. I mean, I don't know that much about it, but I know he's got a very... He comes across very respectable, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't need to do a lot of charity work.
Yeah. It's just sort of his overall attitude to life, I think, is very sort of something to look up to.
Yeah, because he had a very difficult upbringing, I think.
Yeah.
And I'm sure I saw an interview he did with Piers Morgan where he...
fiery.
Yeah, it was very fiery. But Piers Morgan is a very fiery guy.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And I remember thinking, actually, because I think his mum lives with him and stuff now. And
he's very family oriented.
Yeah.
So it's something I sort of agree with.
Yeah, I'd go along with that.
Yeah. So this has been episode 4 of the MoneySmart podcast. Thanks very much to Peter for joining us. We hope that what he said has been valuable. We definitely think it has been. And join us next time.